Shane Beamer will be heading back to a familiar place in Norman, Oklahoma in the 2024 SEC football season. How do Sooner fans feel about this and their team heading into their first year in the SEC? Locked On Sooners host John Williams joins me on this crossover edition between the Gamecocks and Sooners podcast to talk about all of that here on today's show.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation and Sooners Nation, and welcome back to our respective show here on the Locked On Gamecocks and the Locked On Sooners podcast, where we cover your teams every single day. I am Locked On Gamecock host Andrew Lyon. Again, pleased to be joined by Locked On Sooners host John Williams on this crossover show to talk about an intriguing matchup between the Gamecocks and Sooners, the first time ever that both of these teams are facing one another in program history. A lot of interesting storylines with this game that we'll be sure to dive into here on today's show. But before we dive into all of that, I want to let y'all know that today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And that's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team, both faster and for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions do apply. John, first of all, thanks for coming on to the show, and how are we doing today?
Yeah, man, it's a lot of fun just gearing up for SEC Party Day on July 1st, and then that first SEC season, man, it's going to be a load of fun.
Yeah, without a doubt. And obviously, it's going to be a very different looking season for Oklahoma. Their first year in the SEC. You're facing a whole new slate of teams, including South Carolina. And on the Gamecocks end, that means that Shane Beamer, he's heading back to his old stomping grounds in a way when the Gamecocks traveled to Norman in mid-October. Shane Beamer, of course, was an assistant head coach and I believe the tight end coach in the years of 2018, 19, and 20 under a head coach that shall remain nameless for Sooner fans' sake on this show. So, John, the first question I want to ask you is this. When Sooner fans saw that they were going to get to play South Carolina in mid-October this upcoming season, what was their initial reaction?
Well, I think everybody was really excited to welcome back Shane Beamer. You know, he was one of those assistant coaches that is very fondly thought of in Norman circles, was great with the media. People have really great memories of his time in Norman. And, you know, when you're a Beamer, you're part of football legend. You know, my grandfather is a VPI grad alumnus from back in the 50s. And, you know, without a college football team early on in my growing up days, I was a Virginia Tech fan watching Beamer ball. And so even myself, I love Shane Beamer. I love the family and kind of what they're about. And so bringing them back to Norman, I think it's really exciting for everybody now. A lot of the staff that's here wasn't a part of that staff during Shane Beamer's time. Now you have offensive line coach Bill Bedenbow that was here and DeMarco Murray were here, but for the most part, it's a brand new staff otherwise. So he will be welcomed back and it's going to be one of those exciting kind of returns for Beamer. Now, hopefully it's going to go well for Oklahoma, but I think everybody's going to be excited to have Shane Beamer back in town.
Yeah, and it'll also be the second time that Shane Beamer will be coaching against Oklahoma head coach Brent Venables, who, of course, was the former defensive coordinator of the Clemson Tigers, the Gamecocks' biggest arch rivals. So there's some familiarity there as well. That'll also be an intriguing storyline when this game takes place in just a few months' time. But, John, the next thing I want to talk about here is sort of the schedule dynamic. I'm really big on this when it comes to these games because, as I'm sure many SEC fans have thrown out to Sooner fans by this point, you know, they talk about the cumulative effect of the season, not just one or two specific games, maybe like at Texas in your old Big 12 days. And so with schedule dynamic, you know, for the Sooners, it's a bit tricky here because y'all played the Texas Longhorns, obviously your biggest rival, the week before you play South Carolina in the old Cotton Bowl. And then the week after, you're going to be playing at Ole Miss. And then for South Carolina, they got to play on the road against Alabama the week before they play the Sooners. And also, it's an 11 a.m. Central Time local kick. So for South Carolina, they'll kind of be used to that because they got the same kickoff time against Bama. But for the Sooners, you know, hey, it could be maybe an emotional letdown spot. So, John, just looking at it from your perspective, do you think any team maybe has an advantage or disadvantage when it comes to the schedule dynamic aspect of this game?
Well, you look at Oklahoma and there's really no weeks off. You go into the SEC, this is kind of what you're looking for. This is the thing that we've been talking about on our show for months is that, yes, the schedule looks hard, but that's what you're signing up for. You're signing up for marquee matchups week in, week out. And if you want to look at a game that could potentially be a trap game, you've got the one at Auburn. You also have this one against South Carolina. You mentioned the 11 a.m. kickoff sandwich between Texas and Ole Miss, two games that could be top 15 matchups. This one has the potential to be a sluggish start for Oklahoma. And you got a quarterback in Lenora Sellers that is athletic enough that could cause a lot of fits for Oklahoma's defense. Even though Oklahoma's defense is going to be really good this year, we've seen at times in years past where an athletic quarterback that can run a little bit, that's got a good arm, can give them a little bit of a fit. So I think there is potential for there to be some struggle in this game. I feel Oklahoma is going to win it because they're going to be a more talented team on the field. But I do think it's going to be one of those games that, okay, we could be playing in the third, fourth quarter and we're like, why is this game as tight as it is? Because I think, again, Lenora Sellers, he's got all the potential to be a difference maker for the Gamecocks at quarterback. And sometimes that's all that takes. And obviously there's going to be talent at other positions, but when you have a dude that is as highly thought of as he is, even though he's got that 3-star label to him, I think he's a lot better than that label provides. And I think he's going to be somebody that surprises a lot of Sooner fans and a lot of people around the SEC.
Yeah, Lenore Sellers could certainly be a name that gets talked about a lot more by the time we get to that point this season. And for Oklahoma, it also could be Jackson Arnold in that same regard as well. We'll be sure to touch on him here in just a few minutes. But before we get into more of the Oklahoma side of things, John, I want to ask you about what you just said regarding what the Sooners have signed up for. Again, first year in the SEC. I'm sure by this point it's being a dead horse for Sooner fans hearing that over and over again. But, again, it's got to be thrilling to know that you're going to have a lot more games where, the opponent, I don't want to necessarily say they're going to disrespect you, but they're going to kind of feel like, hey, we're kind of maybe a bit closer to you than, you might think. You maybe have not gotten that every time you play, a Baylor or maybe a Texas Tech or a Kansas or an Iowa State. But obviously that won't be quite the case in the SEC. So in terms of maybe the excitement factor for Sooner fans, how excited are they about this new challenge that the SEC is going to offer that maybe you didn't quite always get in the Big 12?
Well, it's brand power. There's so much more brand power in the SEC. When you look across the field and you're going to see a Tennessee or you're going to see an Auburn and even South Carolina. I mean, what Steve Spurrier did with South Carolina, it helped kind of raise the brand and it raised the profile for the Gamecocks. And Shane Beamer's kind of doing some of the same, even though the results haven't quite been there yet. The same thing is happening. And so you go week to week and you look across the field and you're seeing a team like an Auburn, a South Carolina, a Tennessee, a Bama, you got LSU, you got Ole Miss. I mean, all these big time brands. You're not going to have the opportunity for a letdown because, like I said, there's no weeks off in the SEC. You've got to be up and you got to be ready to go every single week. And Brent Venables has kind of been preaching to that over the last couple of years. It's, hey, every day we've got to be at our best. We cannot afford a day off, whether it's, a team that's going to come and give us their best or because we're going to be on level playing field with a lot of these teams now, as opposed to what has been the concern for Oklahoma fans for quite some time is having that letdown game against a team that you're way better than. We've seen it year in and year out, whether it's a Kansas or an Iowa State or a Texas Tech. At times, okay, you're the more talented team on the field, but you have a bit of a letdown game because you are the more talented team on the field. Well, that's going to be less so the case in the SEC, where you're going to have to bring your A game on a week in, week out basis, whether you're playing on the road or at home, because there are a lot of tough opponents that Oklahoma is going to be facing.
Yeah, and to make a quick point on Brent Venables before we get into our first break here, John, I think that he is probably the right coach to lead the Sooners into this new era of football for your program because, Brent Venables has coached in a lot of big time games against a lot of SEC programs. Obviously, a lot of games against South Carolina, but also some games against Alabama, I think a game or two against Georgia. So he understands, hey, in terms of the physicality aspect, we've got to make sure that we level our game in that regard before we start playing all these teams every single week. And obviously, Brent Venables has had a couple of years, both in terms of recruiting and coaching the team up in other ways in order to get the program ready for all that. So with that being said, What is it that Oklahoma is going to be bringing to the SEC? How do things look at the quarterback position? Which position group might they be most prepared with? And which one might there be a little bit of a question mark heading into their first year in the league? John will talk about all of that in a few moments right here on this crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Sooners podcast. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team, both faster and for free. In a way, John, it's kind of the way that our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, operates when it comes to this stuff, because they look for the right fit. They don't look for just the biggest name out there when it comes to covering all these teams. They look for people that are going to be suited for the podcast that they are looking to fill in. And so LinkedIn is also great in that aspect, because on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So if you're looking to hire a professional, look for professionals on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, welcome back to this crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Sooners podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks and your Oklahoma Sooners, respectively, every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks or Locked On Sooners podcast your first choice for South Carolina Gamecock and Oklahoma Sooner sports coverage. All right, John, let's talk a little bit about the Sooners specifically now when it comes to a personnel standpoint, starting off with the quarterback position in Jackson Arnold. Now, Jackson Arnold, he's only started one game in his college career to this point, but obviously a lot of hype that he's bringing with him. I believe he was a 5-star coming out of high school in the 2023 recruiting class, played in the Alamo Bowl this past December against the Arizona Wildcats, had some good moments, but maybe also some down moments as well, but, gave fans an idea of what they can expect or what they will be looking for when this upcoming season takes place. So, John, how will Jackson Arnold change the complexion of this offense compared to maybe what a Dillon Gabriel brought during his time in Norman?
Yeah, so Dillon Gabriel was really fantastic in his 2 years with Oklahoma before transferring to Oregon, but there were a little bit of limitations. What Jackson Arnold's going to be able to do well, he throws the deep ball really, really well. He's got a big arm. He's got NFL size. He's got good mobility. He's got good accuracy. Yeah, he threw the 3 interceptions, had the fumble in the Alamo Bowl game, but some of those throws, there was one that's questionable. The other 2 interceptions were just really nice plays by the Wildcats defense. Jackson Arnold learning the things he can get away with at the college level and maybe some of the things he can't get away with that he was able to at the high school level. But he's got all the talent in the world to be really, really good in Oklahoma's offense. And the things that he's going to do well are some of the things that are going to help Oklahoma take advantage of the skill set that they have at wide receiver. Deion Burks was a great addition in the transfer portal out of Purdue, brings big time speed, big time athleticism, and can get down the field and win big. Nick Anderson is a homegrown player. The brother of former Oklahoma Sooners running back Rodney Anderson, dude, 6'4", but he wins down the field. He gets open, averaged more than 20 yards per reception, had double-digit touchdowns in a breakout year for him last year. So not only will Jackson Arnold be really, really good in some ways that Dillon Gabriel wasn't, in particular throwing the deep ball, there are going to be ways that Oklahoma's offense can utilize that because of the skill set that they have at wide receiver as well. One thing that, Dillon Gabriel was really good at was protecting the football. I think some of that was just him and Jeff Lebby, the former offensive coordinator now at Mississippi State, a little bit risk averse, not really willing to throw 50-50 balls, willing to throw into dangerous situations. Well, Jackson Arnold, he's got a bit of more of a gunslinger mentality. He's going to throw the ball into 50-50 situations and let his athletic wide receivers go up and try to make a play. There's a guy, Jaden Gibson, who was kind of their 5th wide receiver and turned into their 4th wide receiver after an injury last year. The dude's 6'4", 6'5", and can jump out of the gym, just makes athletic play after athletic play. Only had 14 receptions, but averaged over 23 yards per reception and had 5 touchdowns last year because Jackson Arnold was willing to throw the ball into jump ball situations. This is a guy to watch out for. Even if he's going to be buried on Oklahoma's depth chart, he's going to get opportunities because Angelo Anthony won't be ready for the start of the season. But the wide receiver group just fits Jackson Arnold to a T in what he's able to do well on the field. And they're going to have some explosive plays, but I also think think he's going to run it really, really efficiently in Seth Luttrell's offense that is going to have a lot of an RPO focus. Jackson Arnold's really good at running the football, and he also throws that slant pass on the RPO really, really well.
Yeah, and by the way, on a side note, John, I hate the fact that General Booty is no longer on Oklahoma's football roster. And by the way, for those of you that are doing a double take, yes, I did say General Booty because the Sooners literally had a quarterback who had that name, but unfortunately, I think he entered the portal this past offseason. So yeah, so SEC fans, unless you're playing Louisiana Monroe non-con play, you're never going to get to know the legend of General Booty from his time in Norman, Oklahoma. But going back to the wide receivers real quick, John, because it seems like that this will be a good segue for my next question for you. It sounds like the Sooners have a lot of talent out wide at the wide receiver position. So maybe that's a position group where you feel like, hey, going into SEC play for the first time ever, we feel like that we can win our share of battles with that position room. But I guess if there's one group where you're kind of like a little bit concerned, might have some question marks about how they're going to fare, at least in year one in SEC play, John, what would that position group be?
It's the offensive line. There are areas that you can go to. Cornerback, I've discussed earlier this week on my show, being an important position battle to watch, but it's offensive line because you lost the 5 guys that started the most games for you last year, the guys that were considered starters. Now, 4 of those guys are on NFL rosters. One of those guys transferred to Missouri. So it's not like you're losing, a bunch of dudes to the portal, or you lost guys that weren't very good. You just lost a lot of good players. Now you've got blue chip prospects that are developing and you believe in and you think are going to be ready to take over. One of those guys is Jacob Sexton, a guy that everybody thinks is maybe Oklahoma's next top 50 pick along the offensive line, a guy like Jake Taylor, another blue chip prospect. You added some significant pieces in the transfer portal. SEC fans are familiar with Michael Tarkin, who played at Florida, also played some time at USC, an experienced dude that's going to offer some at left tackle, similar to what they had in Walter Rouse last year. Maybe not the most flashy name, but again, an experienced guy that knows how to play the position. And then they added one of the probably fastest risers at right guard in Fabichu, who played at North Texas, was a freshman All-American, and just continues to see his stock rise. Added Branson Hickman out of SMU, a good SMU offense, a guy that played over 2,400 snaps. So while they do have some holes along the offensive line and there are position battles that are taking place this summer and will into fall camp, they've got a lot of experience that they can work with that gives them a really, really nice floor. And if some of their blue chip prospects and some of those young guys that were freshmen last year and sophomores this year, if they're able to come in and take a job, then maybe you see that floor rise a little bit more. But at the very least, you've got some really nice veteran options in Tarkin, Hickman, and Wee to help supplement the blue chip stars that you've got in Sexton and Taylor and Heath Ozida, who's a guard prospect that everybody feels really, really excited about. So offensive line is the one, but the reason why there's so much confidence despite all the turnover along the offensive line is offensive line coach Bill Bedenbaugh, a guy that's been with Oklahoma for a long time, a former Joe Moore award-winning offensive line coach, has more offensive linemen on NFL rosters right now than anybody in the country. And so you love the development, you love the scouting ability, the talent evaluation ability of Bill Bedenbaugh, and the ability to just put it all together. We've had offensive line questions for much of the last several years, but every year it comes together for the Oklahoma Sooners. Now a different challenge going into the SEC where the talent is better than what it is in the Big 12. Whether you want to look at NFL draft picks or you want to look at recruiting rankings, the SEC is just going to have more talent than what it does in the Big 12. That's just the reality of it. So Oklahoma's going to have a much bigger challenge ahead of them, but I think they're going to be up to the challenge and they're going to be ready to go week 1, or I say week 4 against Tennessee when they roll into Norman.
Yeah, and you mentioned the challenge that this new SEC era will bring for the Oklahoma Sooners. It's created an interesting conversation regarding what the ceiling might be for the Sooners. How does John Williams feel about the rhetoric surrounding Oklahoma and their potential from other SEC fans this offseason? We'll touch on that and the SEC team that Sooner fans are most looking forward to seeing this upcoming fall in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Sooners. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more, and you can bet it all right now on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you can use to bet everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. The NBA Finals have officially concluded, but baseball season is still in full swing, and if you're an Atlanta Braves fan, or maybe if you're a Texas Rangers fan, your team is still in contention for a potential World Series title. According to FanDuel, the odds for the Braves to win the World Series are set at plus 900, and for the Texas Rangers, the odds are set at plus 3,000, but as we saw this past season, you never quite know what can happen. So if you feel confident that maybe your team can win it all later this October or November, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, welcome back to today's crossover edition between the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Sooners podcast, where we cover your teams every single day in around 30 minutes or less. All right, John, let's talk about the rhetoric surrounding the Oklahoma Sooners, because as you just mentioned, you kind of feel like that, hey, the Sooners, they might not have every position group shored up, but overall, they'll be up to the challenge compared to almost every other team in your current position heading into year one of SEC play. Some other SEC fans might beg to differ. Some might feel like that, hey, Oklahoma, you might, drop a couple games that you usually aren't expecting to drop. Maybe you actually are fighting for a bowl position. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that, but that's what some other people have said. So, John, what is your overall opinion on sort of the rhetoric surrounding the Sooners and their year one potential from other SEC fan bases?
Listen, I get the undervaluing of Oklahoma as a football team. I get where people are putting Oklahoma. Again, the offensive line turnover, the quarterback turnover, all that, it matters. We're not going to sit here and say that stuff doesn't matter. At the same time, we're optimistic about what they bring to the table, both along the offensive line and Jackson Arnold. And I think people are underselling Oklahoma's defense and the growth that it's made in 2 years under Brent Venables and the direction that it's heading in year 3. Listen, the SEC is a different challenge. It is. Oklahoma is going to face teams, several in the top 15 when the preseason polls come out. I mean, Tennessee, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri. I'm sure I'm forgetting Texas. Obviously, that's a bunch of teams that are going to be really, really tough. There's no doubt about it. The thing that I keep trying to remind everybody is that Oklahoma is going to be really, really tough as well. You're dealing with the Oklahoma Sooners. This is a 7-time national champion, a 50-time conference champion, a team with 7 Heisman winners that recruits as well as anybody in the country right now, not named Georgia. And so this is a talented team that Brent Venables is putting together, a team that is going to have a really, really good defense, a team that's going to have a really, really good offense. Despite all the turnover, they're still going to be really, really good. There's only maybe a handful of times over the last 25 years that Oklahoma's offense has not been really, really stinking good. Doesn't matter the offensive play call. It doesn't matter if it's Lincoln Riley or Kevin Sumlin or Mike Leach or Mark Mangino, Josh Heupel, pick one. The Oklahoma Sooners offense is going to be really, really good under Seth Luttrell in year 1 in the SEC because Oklahoma just knows how to score points. I get all the rhetoric. I get everybody's apprehension about wanting to rank Oklahoma high. The part I don't quite understand is why we're doing what we're doing with Texas right now. Texas, yes, coming off of a playoff appearance that they lost. Again, remember all the rhetoric about Oklahoma can't win the playoff game, but of course, Texas goes to the playoff, and all of a sudden they're the best thing since sliced bread. They lost 11 guys to the NFL. So I don't understand how we're not having the same discussion about Texas, where 247 Sports is picking them to win 11 games, beat Georgia, beat Ole Miss, and be at the front of the SEC rankings. That's the part I don't get. So I get where some of the rhetoric is going. I've said that the floor for Oklahoma is 8-4. I really feel like this is a team that can win 9-10 games and contend for a playoff spot. Everything's coming together for them. Will they do it? We'll see. I mean, those trips to Auburn, to Oxford, playing South Carolina at home, that trip to Baton Rouge when you face LSU the last week of the season, that's going to be a tough game. You've got a lot of tough road trips. In addition to welcoming Alabama, playing Texas in the Cotton Bowl, going to play Missouri, an improved Missouri team. So a lot's going to have to go right for Oklahoma, but I do think a lot can go right. And the SEC is going to have to contend with an Oklahoma team that they haven't had to contend with before either.
Yeah, and when you bring up the fact that Texas, they're sort of not having the same questions thrown their way that maybe Oklahoma's having thrown their way. The only thing I could say to that is maybe it's because Sarkisian has been a coordinator in the league, so some people might assume the transition won't be quite as steep for him as far as the learning curve. And obviously, recency bias has always been a big thing in college football. We can forget a lot in 1 year's time as far as maybe a team's trajectory or what a program has accomplished over the course of 3 or 4 years. And so that kind of leads me to my final question for you, John. Obviously, again, you mentioned Alabama, you mentioned Ole Miss, you mentioned South Carolina. There's a lot of games for Oklahoma fans to look forward to this upcoming fall. But if there's one game that sticks out above the rest, and obviously you can't pick Texas because everyone understands that one, but which game are Sooner fans most looking forward to in the 2024 season?
It's Alabama. It's welcoming the Crimson Tide. Now that I think it lost a little bit of luster with Nick Saban's retirement, but you're still welcoming Alabama, a team that won the SEC championship last year, a team that went to the playoff with Jalen Milroe, a really, really good quarterback. I mean, that's the kind of marquee matchup that Oklahoma has been excited to get since the SEC announcement was made back in 2021. Like, this is what we've been looking forward to. Now, there are a lot of games that Oklahoma fans are looking forward to for a variety of reasons. The trip to Oxford to go play Ole Miss, to go to the Grove, be a part of one of the greater tailgates in college football. The trip to Auburn to go to Jordan Hare Stadium. That is going to be a phenomenal one. But that if we're talking about a road trip that everybody's most geeked up about, it's that LSU one, that Baton Rouge, probably at night against LSU potentially with playoff implications. I mean, that game is going to be on fire. I think everybody's excited to bring, Tennessee to town and welcome Josh Heupel back for the first time since he was let go as offensive coordinator almost a decade ago at this point. So there's a lot of games that Oklahoma fans are looking forward to for a lot of reasons. I think everybody's kind of excited to get to Columbia to maybe go put Missouri back in its place and remind them that, hey, over the 90 plus times that we've played, we've had your number a great majority of those times. So I get your 10 win season. Hey, Brady Cook's really, really good. Luther Burden, he's really, really good. Caden Green, you're really, really good, but you're not quite going to be on the level of Oklahoma. I'm sorry about that. So I think, again, there's so many games on the schedule that fans are looking forward to that it's hard to pick one that the fan base is most excited for. I think so many fans are excited about so many of these games for a variety of reasons. But man, if I had to nail down like three, it's Alabama, it's the trip to the Grove to play Ole Miss, and then it's that one at the end of the season against LSU in Baton Rouge. I think those are probably the three that most fans would say, hey, that's the one I've got circled on my calendar.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing, John, that Sooner fans are going to come to appreciate very quickly about the SEC. Once y'all begin to play these games this upcoming fall, is like, it's not like all these SEC teams just absolutely hate each other's guts and they won't, acknowledge any aspect about a program that's good. Obviously you acknowledge the history certain programs have, the tradition, and how much pageantry these fan bases carry. And I think that because of all of that, Sooner fans are going to enjoy life in the SEC very quickly once things get started in 2024.
And just one last thing, I think that's part of the reason why there's so much excitement is Oklahoma, Texas. We feel like we're just a better fit, from a history, from a tradition standpoint, from a stadium capacity standpoint, from a pageantry standpoint, it just fits better. Iowa State was about the only other program aside from Oklahoma and Texas that could provide a capacity crowd that rivals what you might see in the SEC.
That's fair.
But you only got there every couple of years. Jack Trice Stadium up there in Ames, it's fantastic atmosphere for college football. So getting that week in, week out is going to be so much fun, and it's going to just create so much buzz the entire season.
100% agree. He is John Williams of the Locked On Sooners podcast. John, I really appreciate you coming on to today's show once again. For Gamecock fans who may be more interested about the Sooners or looking to find some information about Oklahoma's football team, where can they find all your work?
Yeah, so Locked On Sooners, wherever you get your podcast. You can also read my work covering the Sooners over at Sooners Wire, part of USAtoday.com. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners or TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you like to follow your socials.
Awesome. Well, he is John Williams once again of Locked On Sooners. I am Andrew Lyon of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Thank you to all you South Carolina Gamecock and Oklahoma Sooner fans who tuned into today's show. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be sure to catch y'all on our next respective shows of the Locked On Gamecocks and Locked On Sooners podcast.